Okay, let's talk about Daenerys III, A Game of Thrones. One thing I haven't talked much about with A Game of Thrones is the second clutch of chapters that he wrote sort of in 1994, and how they're sort of similar and different from what comes before and what comes after. I talked a bit about how the first clutch of chapters, the first 13 or so chapters, is written back in 91, 92, and then he takes a break for to try to push forward his Doorways pilot, which failed, and he doesn't come back to A Game of Thrones until late 1993 and starts writing again. And so the year of 1994 is it's a slow year for him. It's actually a kind of a slog year. Um, a Game of just for a little history, like A Game of Thrones is about 1,000 manuscript pages. He writes, about 160 manuscript pages back in the 91, 92 before the break, and then the year 1994, where he's writing this clutch, he only writes another 200 pages, and then it's in that final year, 1995, that he writes like a maniac again and puts out about 500 600 pages that year. Plus, he gets into A Clash of Kings and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's a very 1995 is a very productive year, but 1994, it's not exactly a a great writing year for him. And these chapters are largely written in that period, and with the exception of, I would say, Catelyn waking up from her mourning and suddenly wanting to go to King's Landing, all of the chapters we've kind of noticed have been a little bit more meandering. They're introductions. They're who are these characters? What's the environment they're living in? We went to John of the Wall and got introduced to a bunch of characters. Tyrion kind of meandered around the wall for atmosphere. We get to King's Landing and it's a lot of characters. And so he doesn't actually get very far in the year 1994, while as opposed to 95, which is just huge, and writes a whole bunch at once. So this is kind of one of these atmosphere chapters for Daenerys. What's kind of interesting is that he's flipped things around with Daenerys, where usually what happens is we learn about a savage culture and then you get to know it and it becomes less savage and you realize that you had stereotypes before. It's kind of gone in reverse with the Dothraki, where Khal Drogo is this guy that hangs out in the free cities and he's a king, and then she discovers actually his society is very primitive. So, but she's still charmed by it. But anyway, let's get into it a little bit. Daenerys. The Dothraki see, Sir Jorah Mormont said as he reined to a halt beside her on the top of a ridge. Beneath them, the plain stretched out, immense and empty, a vast expanse that reached to the distant horizon and beyond. It was a sea, Dany thought. Past here, there were no hills, no mountains, no trees, nor cities, nor roads. Only the endless grasses, the tall blades rippling like waves when the winds blew. Atmosphere, atmosphere, atmosphere. It's so green, she said. In retrospect, we kind of see her being charmed by the grass because it reminds her of the house with the red door. But keep in mind that when George wrote this chapter, a lot about the Dany story hadn't really been established yet. So, for example, Dany's eggs are found later, and then he retroactively pops them in at the wedding and stuff like this. So we're not real. I don't know if George really knows where the story is going at this point. So it's so green here and now, Jorah agreed. You ought to see it when it blooms, all dark red flowers from horizon to horizon, like a sea of blood. Come the dry season, and the world turns the color of old bronze. And this is only the Harana, child. George likes the sound hur. We don't use it very much we don't use it ever in English. I think there might be a Ukrainian currency that starts with HR, but of of course, in George's book, The Thousand Worlds, the main enemy of the Earthlings in the setting were the Harangan mines. And so he's probably just got Harangan mines in there. Harana being Harangan, you know. There are hundreds of grass out there. Yellow grasses as yellow as lemon and dark as indigo. Blue grasses and orange grasses and grasses like rainbows. Down in the shadowlands beyond Ashai, they say there are oceans of ghost grass, taller than a man on horseback with stalks as pale as milk glass. It murders all other glass and glows in the dark with the spirits of the damned. The Dothraki claim that someday ghost grass will cover the entire world and then all life will end. An obvious metaphor for the others. We get these metaphors a bit throughout the story, mainly the squishers and stuff like that. But yes, ghost grass is a metaphor. George likes putting in these universal stories like Night Flyers with the Vulcan, and everybody having their own Vulcan tale. Well, this is the Dothraki tale. The others are ghost grass. It's not really important why Jorah knows all of this. He's just there for exposition. Yeah. The thought gave Dany shivers. I don't want to talk about that now. It's so beautiful here. I don't want to think about everything dying. As you will, Khaleesi, Sir Jorah said respectfully. Now, this is why I always don't like Jorah. I think he's a schemer. You know, for instance, he's calling her Khaleesi. Why is he calling her Khaleesi? Like, why he should, you know, which literally means queen. You know, why isn't he calling her princess or something like that? If Viserys, the person he is serving, is the king and things like this. She heard the sound of voices and turned to look behind her. She and Mormont had outdistanced the rest of the party, and now the others were climbing the ridge below them. Her handmaid Irri and young archers of her cause were fluid as centaurs. But Viserys still struggled with short stirrups and the flat saddle. This is a bit weird. I mean, obviously they've been out here now months. It's hard to believe that anyone would still be struggling, that you'd get the hang of it some. By the way, for those that don't know, saddles tend to be either flat or deep. Deep is for if you want more stability. So for instance, if you're in a tourney or a battle, you'd want to have sturdiness in your saddle, while a flat saddle allows more movement if you need to dismount a lot, if you need to like be able to move and lasso something, or you know, things like this. So the Dothraki have flat saddles allowing them to dismantle and, you know, do archery or do lassoing or whatever. The short stirrups, I mean, it provides the same function, but if you're riding a horse, you can just take your feet out of the stirrups. It's not, if you're on a long ride, people take their feet out of stirrups all the time. It's not that big a deal. Like, you just put them back in, to rest your feet. So, but whatever. I mean, but it's hard to believe that, like, it's George is attempting to say that Viserys was raised with using a deep saddle for jousting or something like that, that maybe he was being trained as a knight at court for jousting, and that he's not used to the flat saddle. But come on, it's been months. like her brother is miserable out here. He ought to never have come. Magister Illyrio had urged him to wait in Pentos, had offered him the hospitality of his manse, but Viserys would have none of it. He said he would stay with Drogo until the debt had been paid, until he had the crown he'd been promised. So it's very clear that at this point, or at least George put it in retroactively, that he already has the golden crown seen in his mind, laid out. And this is the hint there. The golden crown it's kind of stolen from history. During the Roman Empire, or not the Roman Empire, during the end of the Roman Republic, we have a period called the First Triumvirate, where there were three military leaders that essentially kept balance in the Republic: Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. And then the balance is knocked out of whack when Crassus dies. Pompey had his army around Rome. Caesar was in Gaul, and Pompey is in the east in Syria and fighting the Parthians, the Persians. And Julius Caesar does really well in his campaigns against Gaul. The big problem with the Romans is that the military leaders got to keep the spoils of their plunders. So Julius Caesar became incredibly rich. And meanwhile, Crassus dies. And Pompey is like, oh, fuck. What am I going to do with Julius Caesar? So don't cross the Rubicon. And Caesar crossed the Rubicon and took over. So but Crassus, they say, died when he was molten gold was poured into his mouth or something. Is this story about his death? And so that's where George is taking it from. But you can see that it's already here that he's going to get this crown. Now, fans make a big deal about what Illyrio's plan is. Does George at this point know that there's going to be a second Targaryen, like that there's going to be an Aegon? I don't know if at this point, the first time we get a hint of there being a possibility of another Targaryen is in the Mormont chapter, in the Jon chapter later on, where Mormont is talking about the history of the Targaryens a little bit and mentions that, some possibilities with Aerion Brightflame and stuff. But that's not, he doesn't write that for a long time. So we don't know if at this point, what George is thinking about. Obviously, he hadn't even planned the eggs at the wedding and things like this. So it's just kind of a mystery, what Illyrio's plans with Viserys are. We get this idea that Illyrio kind of knows that Viserys is crazy, and obviously Jorah Mormont knows that Viserys is crazy. So what the fuck are they doing? And he urges him to stay at the manse. Was he really trying to crown Viserys or not? Did George think he was or not? It's hard to say. But what would have happened to Viserys had he stayed? Would Illyrio would have killed him there, or what? If he tries to cheat me, he will learn to his sorrow what it means to wake the dragon. Viserys had vowed, laying a hand on his borrowed sword. Illyrio had blinked at that and wished him good fortune. Yeah, Illyrio, this is the second time Illyrio just kind of blinks, okay. Dany realized that she did not want to listen to any of her brother's complaints right now. The day was too perfect. The sky was deep blue, and high above them a haunting hawk circled. The grass sea swayed and sighed with each breath of the wind. The air was warm on her face, and Dany felt at peace. She would not let Viserys spoil it. They always criticize Viserys for not having patience and things like this, but he rides with the Dothraki for a year. He puts up with this stuff for nearly a year. And we're supposed to think that Viserys is stupid and impatient and impetuous, but I wonder how many of us could have tolerated traveling with the Dothraki for a year like this, But that's just my own weird, sick pity and sympathy I have for Viserys, probably based on Harry Lloyd's portrayal of him. Wait here, Dany told Jorah. Tell them all to stay. Tell them I command it. This is where I say Jorah is just a fuckface. The knight smiled. Sir Jorah was not a handsome man. He had a neck and shoulders like a bull, and coarse black hair covered his arms and chest so thickly that there was none left for his head. Yet his smiles gave Dany comfort. You're beginning to talk like a queen, Daenerys. Not a queen, said Dany. A Khaleesi. Again, he serves King Viserys. And he's sitting there being like, oh yeah, it's so great that you're getting to be all powerful. She wheeled her horse about and galloped down the ridge alone. I mean, maybe he's just in love with her already. The descent was steep and rocky, but Dany rode fearlessly, and the joy of the danger of it was a song in her heart. This is getting back all of a sudden that Dany is this fearless rider. All of her life, Viserys had told her she was a princess, but not until she rode her silver had Daenerys ever felt like one. At first, it had not come easy, except when she immediately jumped over that fire at her wedding. At first, it had not come easy. Okay. I mean, that directly contradicts the text, but okay. The Khalasar had broken camp in the morning after her wedding, moving east towards Dothraki. And by the third day, Dany thought she was going to die. Saddle sores opened on her bottom, hideous and bloody. Her thighs were chafed, raw, her hands blistered from the reins, the muscles of her legs and back so racked with pain that she could scarcely sit. By the time dusk fell, her handmaids would need to help her down from her mount. Even the knights brought no relief. Khal Drogo ignored her when they rode, even as he ignored her during their wedding. And he spent his evenings drinking with the warriors and blood riders, racing his prize horses, watching women dance and men die. Man, they gotta just stop killing each other. Dany had no place. I mean, how many people are dying? Dany had I guess it's been months. I don't know. Dany had no place in these parts of his life. She was left to sup alone, or with Ser Jorah and her brother, and afterwards to cry herself to sleep. Yet every night, sometime before the dawn, Drogo would come to her tent and wake her in the dark to ride her as relentlessly as he rode his stallion. He always took her from behind, Dothraki fashion, for which Dany was grateful. That way her lord husband could not see the tears on that wetter face. You know, again, it kind of weird from the wedding night, which was like so, like, you know, sensual and her being into it, and then it's reversed here into a more realistic situation. You know, I'd say. And she could use her pillow to muffle her cries of pain. When he was done, he would close his eyes and begin to snore softly, and Dany would lie beside him, her body bruised and sore, hurting too much for sleep. This idea that, like, they're so savage that they only do it doggy style, the Dothraki fashion, as if, like, the rest of the world didn't, you know, only did missionary style. Or that, you know, Europeans only did missionary style. Like, I mean, it's just like, it's completely a little hard to believe that, like, anyway, that Dany day followed day and night followed night until Dany knew she could not endure a moment longer. She would kill herself rather than go on, she decided one night. Yet when he slept that night, she dreamt the dragon dream again. Viserys was not in it this time. There was only her and the dragon. The scales were black and night, wet and slick with blood. Her blood, Dany sensed. Its eyes were pools of molten magma, and when it opened its mouth, the flames came roaring out in a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, let it swallow her whole, let it cleanse her and temper her and scour her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slough away. She could she could feel her blood boil and turn to steam. And yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce. So this is kind of the first. Did we get dragon dreams before? This is the in retro, like, later on in a Game of Thrones, she has this idea that the stars are whispering to her, and then later in all the way in A Dance with Dragons, it kind of is established that the stars whispering to her are Quaithe. So this idea that Quaithe is giving her dragon dreams is certainly part of that. But then again, Dany has relatives, ancestors who also get dragon dreams probably before Quaithe's birth. So who's giving her the dreams, you know? Or are they just innate, the dragon dreams? Or is it time traveling Bran, you know? But probably at this point when George is writing this, he hasn't figured it out. But eventually, you know, Quaithe being the main person is inserted. But the dreams seem to keep, every time she does something crazy, it's from the dreams. And the next day, so now the dreams seem to be healing her even. The next day, strangely, she did not seem to hurt quite so much. It was as if the gods had heard her and taken pity. Even her handmaids noticed the change. Khaleesi, Jikwi said, "What is wrong? Are you sick?" "I was," she answered, standing over the dragon's eggs that Illyria had given her when she was wed. She touched one, the largest of the three, running her hand lightly over the shelf. Black and scarlet, she thought, like the dragon in my dream. The stone felt strangely warm beneath her fingers. Or was she still dreaming? She pulled her hand back nervously. This is added in the original version. This isn't here. This flashback to the eggs. From that hour on, I mean, here it's almost implied that the egg itself is talking to her, that she's telepathically connecting with the dragons. From that hour onward, each day was easier than the one before it. Her legs grew and stronger, her blisters burst, and her hands grew calloused. Her soft thighs toughened, supple as leather. Yet, not at all the Viserys. The Khal had commanded the handmaid Irri to teach Dany to ride in the Dothraki fashion, but it was the filly who was her real teacher. The horse seemed to know her moods as if they shared a single mind. Oh, telepathy with the horse. With every passing day, Dany felt surer in the seat. The Dothraki were a hard and unsentimental people, and it was not their custom to name their animals. So Dany thought of her only as the Silver. And so the Silver is still alive in The Winds of Winter. Barristan is riding the Silver. I mean, I imagine this is a reference to, the Lone Ranger's horse. That Lone Ranger was a show that George certainly watched when he was young. She had never loved anything so much. As the riding became less an ordeal, Dany began to notice the beauties of the land around her. She rode at the head of the Khalasar with Drogo and his blood riders, so she came to each country fresh and unspoiled. Behind them, the great horde might tear the earth and muddy the rivers and send up clouds of choking dust. But the fields ahead of them were always green and verdant. Didn't he say that Drogo would ignore her? So he's riding with them, but I guess he's still ignoring her. Right? Let me go back here. Khal Drogo ignored her when they rode. Okay. Behind them, the great horde might tear the earth. Okay. They crossed the rolling hills of Norvos, past terraced farms and small villages where the townsfolk walked anxiously from atop white stucco walls. They forded 3 wide placid rivers and a 4th that was swift and narrow and treacherous, camped beside a high blue waterfall, skirted the tumbled ruins of a vast dead city where ghosts were said to moan among blackened marble columns. They raced down Valyrian roads 1,000 years old and straight as a Dothraki arrow. For half a moon they rode through the forest of Qohor, where the leaves made a golden canopy high above them and the trunks of trees were wide as city gates. Let's see here. I'm curious about. I'm looking up really quick the map of Essos. How well he followed it. Yeah. So I guess he did follow the map of Essos. Let's see if it still makes sense, right? Let's see here. I'm going to bring it up. So there's the Valyrian Road. They're definitely going down that. And then let's see here. they ride through the forest of Qohor. Qohor is definitely forested. And let's see here. 3 placid rivers and 1 swift and narrow and treacherous. So I guess, from Pentoast you're going, 1, 2, 3, and then 1 swift. So, or maybe this one's swift. Oh, they should have forded 4 placid rivers. Maybe there was a bridge over one and they didn't ford it. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. But yeah, around Norvos, there's going to be terraced farms because it's in the hills. So it seems very much so that the eventual map for Essos was based on this little area, this text. There were great elk in that wood, and spotted tiger and lemurs with silver fur and huge purple eyes, but all fled before her approach of the Khalasar, and Dany got no glimpse of them. But then her agony was a fading memory. She still ached after a long day's riding, yet somehow the pain had a sweetness to it now, and each morning she came willingly to her saddle, eager to know what wonders waited for her in the lands ahead. She began to find pleasures even in her nights, and if she cried out when Drogo took her, it was not always in pain. So the hopping around in time is really difficult to figure out her feelings, now that I'm looking at this. Because now it's like she's talking about being ignored just like how she's ignored at night. And maybe they're going back. At first it didn't come easy, and then we start from there. I guess it's still, the flashback is long. It does get confusing here. Let's get back to where we were. Her agony was a fading memory. She still ached after a long day's riding, yet somehow the pain had sweetness to it. In the morning came she willing to the saddle, bottom of the ridge, the grasses. Each night she drove her, it was not always in pain. I'm surprised, Dariah should have been training her for months now. Isn't some of that sex coming into it? Who knows? But at the bottom of the ridge, the grasses rose around her, tall and supple. Dany slowed to a trot and rode out onto the plain, losing herself in the green, blessedly alone. In the Khalasar, she was never alone. Khal Drogo came to her only after the sun went down. It's so weird. So she's talking about how, this is kind of all over the map, because she's talking about how she's lonely and she has no one to talk to. But then she's also complaining that she's never alone. I mean, yeah, you can make it work, but it's weird. Khal Drogo came to her only after the sun went down, even though she rode next to him the whole way. But her handmaids fed her and bathed her and slept by the door of her tent. Drogo's blood riders and men of her cause were never far. And her brother was an unwelcome shadow day and night. And yet, Dany could hear him on the top of the ridge, his voice shrill with anger as he shouted at Jorah. She rode on, submerging herself deeper in the Dothraki Sea. So that's the thing. Jorah went and commanded Viserys to do something, so he's shouting at Jorah. Keep in mind, Dany says, I command it. Jorah smiles, is like, yeah, that's awesome. You're talking like a queen. And then he goes and he commands. He fucking commands his king. What king in the story would not have been upset? Maybe Mance Rayder. I don't know. But what king in the story would not have reacted badly to what Jorah did? Ask yourself that. Renly? How would Stannis have reacted had one of his knights commanded him to do something? How would Robert have reacted if one of his knights commanded him to do something? How would Joffrey react? You know, Tommen might be fine. How would Balon react if one of his knights commanded him? The green swallowed her up. The air was rich with the scents of earth and grass, mixed with the smell of horseflesh and Dany's sweat and the oil in her hair. Dothraki smells. They seem to belong here. Dany breathed it all in, laughing. She had a sudden urge to feel the ground beneath her, to curl her toes in the thick black soil. The barefoot aspect, I think at the beginning she was envying the barefoot children. She has the vision at the House of the Undying of running barefoot in grass towards the house with the red door. To curl her toes in the thick black soil. Swinging down from her saddle, she let the silver graze while she pulled off her high boots. Viserys came upon her as sudden as a summer storm. His horse rearing beneath him to be reined up too hard. "You dare," he screamed at her, "you give me commands to me. To me." I mean, yeah, I'm just saying, he acts like any other king in the story would act here. Defending Viserys. Viserys did nothing wrong. Defending Viserys here. He vaulted off the horse, stumbled as he landed. Good thing he had a flat saddle. He can vault off the horse, right? You know? Deep saddle, it's going to be harder to do that. His face was flushed as he struggled back to his feet. He grabbed her, shook her. "Have you forgotten who you are? Look at you. Look at you." Dany did not need to look. She was barefoot, with oiled hair, wearing Dothraki riding leathers and a painted vest given to her as a bride gift. She looked as though she belonged here. Viserys was soiled and stained in city silks and ringmail. He was still screaming, You do not command the dragon. Do you understand? I'm the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. I will not hear orders from some horse lord slut. Do you hear me?" His hand went under her vest, his fingers digging painfully into her breast. "Do you hear me?" It is very weird. I mean, we've talked about this before, about whether or not Viserys does lust after his sister, but whether he does or doesn't, he always seems to choose sexual aspects as a way to torture her, twisting her nipple and such. Dany shoved him away hard. Viserys stared at her, his lilac eyes incredulous. She had never defied him, never fought back. Rage twisted his features. He would hurt her now, and badly, she knew that. Crack! The whip made a sound like thunder. The coil took Viserys around the throat and yanked him backwards. He went sprawling in the grass, stunned and choking. The Dothraki riders hooted at him as he struggled to free himself. The one with the whip, young Jogo, rasped a question. Dany did not understand his words. But by then, Irri was there, and Ser Jorah, and the rest of her cause. So clearly they saw Viserys going there, and they chose to intervene because she was off alone, you know. Jogo asks you to have him dead, Khaleesi, Irri said. No, Dany replied, no. Jogo understood that. She's been with the Khalasar pretty long. She should probably know some Dothraki now. One of the others barked out a comment, and the Dothraki laughed. Irri told her, Caro thinks you should take an ear to teach him respect. Her brother was on his knees, his fingers digging under the leather coils, crying incoherently, struggling for breath. The whip was tight around his windpipe. Tell him I do not wish him harmed, Dany said. Irri repeated her words in Dothraki. Jogo gave a pull on the whip, yanked Viserys around like a puppet on a string. He went sprawling again, freed from the leather embrace, a thin line of blood under his chin where the whip had cut deep. I warned him that would happen, my lady, Ser Jorah said. I told him to stay on the ridge, as you commanded. And you can see this is all Ser Jorah's fault. He commands. I told him to stay on the ridge, as you commanded. Jorah. I know you did, Dany replied, watching Viserys. He lay on the ground, sucking in air noisily, red-faced and sobbing. He was a pitiful thing. He had always been a pitiful thing. Why had she never seen that before? I don't know. You guys try to get Eva nearly be choked to death and see how you act. There was a hollow place inside her where her fear had been. Take his horse, Dany commanded Ser Jorah. Viserys gaped at her. He could not believe what he was hearing, nor could Dany quite believe what she was saying. Yet the words came. Let my brother walk behind us, back to the Khalasar. Among the Dothraki, the man who did not ride was no man at all, the lowest of the low, without honor or pride. Let everyone see him as he is. No! Viserys screamed. He turned to Ser Jorah, pleading in the common tongue with words the horsemen could not understand. Hit her, Mormont. Hurt her. Your king commands it. Kill these Dothraki dogs and teach her. The exile knight looked from Dany to her brother, she barefoot with dirt between her toes and oil in her hair. He with silks and steel. Dany could not see the decision on his face. He shall walk, Khaleesi, he said. He took her brother's horse by the hand while Dany remounted her silver. Viserys gaped at him and sat down in the dirt. He kept his silence, but he would not move, and his eyes were full of poison as they rode away. Soon he was lost in the tall grass, and they could not see him any more. Dany grew afraid. Will he find his way back? She asked Jorah as they rode. Even a man as blind as your brother should be able to follow our trail, he replied. He is proud. He may be too ashamed to come back. Jorah laughed. He laughs at this situation. This is his king. Jorah vowed. As a knight, you vow. You make a vow in service to someone. And keep in mind, vow, this is not just an honor thing. This is a legal thing. Okay, vows are legally binding. They're a legally binding contract in medieval society. Vows is what everything rests on. They're essentially spoken contracts. And so Jorah is violating his spoken contract with Viserys, which is, again, why I hate Jorah. He is a bad knight. Where else should he go? If he cannot find the Khalasar will most surely find him. It's hard to drown in the Dothraki Sea, child. Dany saw the truth of it. The Khalasar was like a city on the march, but it did not march blindly. Always scouts ranged far ahead of the main column, alert for any signs of game or prey or enemies, while outriders guarded their flank. They missed nothing, not here in this land, the place where they had come from. These plains were part of them, and of her now. And if this comes back, in A Dance with Dragons, obviously one of the outriders finds Dany. I hit him, she said, wonder in her voice. Now that it was over, it seemed like a strange dream that she had dreamed. Hitting a king is usually either death or you lose the hand. Ser Jorah, do you think he'll be so angry when he gets back? She shivered. I woke the dragon, didn't I? Ser Jorah snorted. Can you wake the dead, girl? Your brother Rhaegar was the last dragon, and he died on the Trident. Viserys is less than the shadow of a snake. His blunt words startled her. It seemed as though all those things she had believed were suddenly called into question. You swore him your sword. Boom. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did, Jorah. That I did, girl, Ser Jorah said. And if your brother is the shadow of a snake, what does that make his servants? His voice was bitter. You're right. You are worse than Viserys, Jorah. He is still the true king. He is. Jorah pulled up his horse and looked at her. Truth now. Would you want to see Viserys sit the throne? And here we see, this is the interesting thing, right? Because now we're pulling it apart, right? We're pulling apart monarchy here. We're saying that who ought to be king? Do you have divine right, or who is the best person should be king? The switching of the logic. And this is, of course, the Stannis Renly situation, right? Everybody thinks Renly would be a great king. Stannis is the true king in this situation, and more people seem to go for Renly, but a lot has to do with who they're going to benefit from. But that's the pull. That's the switch around. Is he would be a bad king, and therefore he's not king. Well, Dany thought about that. He would not be a very good king, would he? There have been worse, but not many. There's been a lot of worse. There's been a lot of worse. I mean, their father for you know, firstly, but obviously Maegor the Cruel. Um, I mean, there's been a lot of bad kings. Oh man. The knight gave his heels to his mount and started off again. Dany rode close beside him. Still, the common people are waiting for him. Magister Illyrio says they are sewing dragon banners and praying for Viserys to return across the narrow sea to free them. This is the funny thing, is that like we are supposed to sit there and go, no, they're not. No, they're not. And believe Jorah here. The common people pray for rain, healthy children, the summer that never ends, Sir George told him. It is no matter to them if the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, so long as they're left in peace. He gave a shrug. They never are. But in fact, as the story goes, we find actually a lot of small folk, a lot of, at least the Daenerys, but we hear of small folk talking about how things were better under Aerys. So a lot of people do actually pray for Viserys to return. So we are given both sides here. Obviously not everybody, but some people at least. Dany rode along quietly for a time, working his words like a puzzle box. It went against everything that Viserys has ever told her, to think that the people could care so little about a true king or a usurper that reigned over them. Yet the more she thought on Jorah's words, the more they rang of truth. What do you pray for, Sir Jorah? She asked him. Home. His voice was thick and longing. I pray for home too, she told him, believing it. Sir Jorah laughed. Look around you then, Khaleesi. But it was not the plains Dany saw. It's not the plains Dany saw then. It was King's Landing and the great red keep that Rhaegon the Conqueror had built. It was Dragonstone, where she had been born. In her mind's eye, they burned with 1,000 lights, a fire blazing in every window. In her mind's eye, all the doors were red. She just wants home and the red door. My brother will never take back the 7 kingdoms, Dany said. She had known that for a long time, she realized. She had known it all her life. Only she had never let herself say the words, even a whisper. But now she said them for Jorah Mormont and all the world to hear. Jorah gave her a measuring look. You think not. He could not lead an army, even if my lord husband gave him one, Dany said. He has no coin, and the only knight who follows him reviles him as less than a snake. The Dothraki make a mock of his weakness. He will never take us home. Wise child, the knight smiled. In truth, I mean, later, Jorah goes back on this and is like, yeah, you never know. you know, like when he's like, oh, if he had one of those eggs, he could buy a sellsword's army. You never know. I am no child, she told him fiercely, her heels pressed into the side of her mount. Rousing the silver to a gallop, faster and faster she raced, leaving Jorah and Eerie and the others behind. The warm wind in her hair and the setting sun red in her face. By the time she reached the Khalasar, it was dusk. That could be the end of the chapter, but we keep going. The slaves had erected her tent by the shore of a spring-fed pool. She could hear rough voices from the woven grass palaces on the hill. Soon there would be laughter when the men of her caste told the story of what happened in the grasses today. By the time Viserys came limping back among them, every man, woman in the camp would know him for a walker. There were no secrets in the Khalasar. Dany gave the silver over to the slaves for grooming and entered her tent. It was cool and dim beneath the silk, and she let the door flap close behind her. Dany saw a finger of dusty red light reach out to touch her dragon's egg across the tent. Now, I think this dragon story and the eggs was added or moved from another chapter, I think in a previous, so which is why like it does feel like the chapter ends and then we have this continuation. In an instant, there were 1,000 droplets of scarlet flame swam before her eyes. She blinked and they were gone. Stone, she told herself. They're only stone. Even Illyrio said so. The dragons are all dead. We're getting this whole dragons waking from stone thing. She put her palms against the black egg, fingers spreading gently across the curve of the shell. The stone was warm, almost hot. The sun, she whispered. The sun warmed them as they rode. She commanded her handmaids to prepare her bath. Daria built a fire outside the tent, while Jiqui fetched the big copper tub, another bride gift from the pack horses that they carried from the pool. When the bathing was steamed, Eerie helped her into it and climbed in after her. I mean, obviously, this seems like that they were not warm from the sun. That actually she's having a telepathic connection with these eggs, and therefore they're warming up. Have you ever seen a dragon? She asked Eerie. She asked as Eerie scrubbed her back and Jiqui sluiced sand from her hair. She had heard that the first dragons had come from the east, from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai and the islands of the Jade Sea. Perhaps somewhere, some were still living dragons in the realm strange and wild. This is this interesting idea about dragons, because later on we kind of get this idea that like dragons seem to have appeared from Valyria and were perhaps genetically engineered, from with science or magics or whoever, that there were these underground worms and stuff like that. We hear all this. So this idea that actually dragons are from the east and these eggs came from Ashai, this has all been retconned. I mean, now we know that the eggs are from Dreamfire and things like this, but this idea that the eggs actually are from Ashai, we're told originally that they're from Ashai, and that the first dragons came from Ashai. So it might be that there's still dragons out there, but dragons are gone. Khaleesi, Eerie said, dead, long and long ago. Viserys had told her that the last Targaryen dragon had died no more than a century and a half ago, during the reign of AGoT III, who was called the Dragonbane. This is definitely later stuff that was added. But later George comes up with the whole family tree and everything. You can, not family tree, but a list of the kings for his appendix. And the Dance of the Dragons is added in there. And I imagine when he puts in the Dance of the Dragons, he gets the idea later that there's going to be the fight between Dany and another Targaryen claimant. So this is all kind of added later. Like who AGoT III was and the Dragonbane. Did not seem so long ago to Dany. Everywhere, she said, disappointed. Even in the east? Magic had died in the west when the doom fell on Valyria and the lands of the long summer. And neither spell-forged steel nor storm singers nor dragons could hold it back. But Dany had always heard that the east was different. Who said that manticores prowled the islands of the Jade Sea and basilisks infested the jungles of E.T., obviously named after E.T. the extraterrestrial. That spell singers, warlocks, and aromancers practiced their arts openly in Ashai, while shadowbinders and blood mages worked terrible sorceries in the black of night. Why shouldn't there be dragons too? No dragon, Eerie said. Brave men kill them. For dragons, terrible evil beasts, it is known. Yeah, I guess so, though a lot of dragons kill dragons. It is known, agreed Jiqui. A trader from Karth once told me that dragons came from the moon. Blonde Daria said as she warmed a towel over the fire. Jiqui and Eerie were of an age with Dany. Daria's Dothraki girls taken as slaves when Drogo destroyed their father's Kelsar. Daria was older, almost 20. Magister Illyrio had found her in the pleasure houses of Weiss. And yet, she hasn't taught her anything yet. It's been months. It's been months. She hasn't even taught her how to do a blowjob. It's a little weird, right? Daria is really just shirking on her job duties, okay? It's been a month, Anyway. Silvery wet hair tumbled across her eyes as Dany turned her head, curious. The moon? He told me the moon was an egg, Khaleesi, the Lyseni girl. Once there were 2 moons in the sky, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat. 1,000 dragons poured forth and drank the fire of the sun. That is why dragons breathe flame. One day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and it will be a crack and the dragons will return. So there's just, this idea that dragons will return again. That's all. Two Dothraki girls giggled and laughed. You're as foolish as a straw-head slave. Moon is no egg. Moon is God. Woman, wife of sun. It is known. It is known. Dany's skin was flushed and pink when she came. A lot of people make a big deal out of the story. I think it's probably simpler than people think. It's probably just that dragons will return one day, and that the fact that the moon is a woman and that eggs that are birthed from the woman is likely the message. I wouldn't read too much into anything past that, but just that she is going to birth dragons. Dany's skin was flushed and pink as she climbed in from the tub. Jikri laid her down to oil her body and scrape the dirt from her pores. Afterwards, Eerie sprinkled her with spice flour and cinnamon, while Dariah brushed her hair until it shone like spun silver. She thought about the moon and eggs and dragons. Her supper was a simple meal of fruit and cheese and fry bread and a jug of honeyed wine to wash it down. Dariah, stay with me. Stay and eat with me, Dany commanded when she sent her handmaids away. The Lysine girl had hair of color of honey and her eyes like the summer sky. She lowered those eyes when they were alone. You honor me, Khaleesi, she said, but it was no honor, only service. Long after the moon had risen, they sat together talking. That night, when Khal Drogo came, Dany was waiting for them. He stood in the door of her tent and looked at her with surprise. She rose slowly and opened her sleeping silks and let them fall to the ground. This night we must go outside, my lord, she told him. For the Dothraki believe that all things of importance in a man's life must be done beneath the open sky. So she finally talks to Dariah about like, hey, it's been months, I know you've got a job. And he's like, okay, yeah, okay. Khal Drogo followed her out in the moonlight and the bells in her hair tinkling softly. A few yards from their tent was a bed of soft grass, and it was there that Dany drew him down. And he tried to turn her over. She put her hands on his chest. No, she said, this night I would look upon your face. There was no privacy in the heart of the Khalasar. Dany felt the eyes on her as she undressed him, heard the soft voices as she did the things that Dariah had told her to do. And it was nothing to her. Was she not a Khaleesi? His were the only eyes that mattered. And when she mounted him, she saw something there that she had never seen before. She rode him fiercely, as ever she had ridden her silver. And when the pleasure came, Khal Drogo called out her name. They were on the far side of the Dothraki Sea when Jikri brushed the swell of Dany's stomach with her fingers. She said, Khaleesi, you're with child. I know, Dany told her. It was her 14th name day. Weird time jump here, but okay. I suppose it's as ridiculous as her immediately knowing how to jump over fire, but her immediately knowing how to ride somebody in the female dominant, the cowboy. That's also ridiculous, but if she's just a natural at it after only a girl Dariah talking to her. And then there's a time skip here where they jump to on the far side of the Dothraki Sea, where all of a sudden she's with child. So now another couple months, because she's not going to start showing for 2 or 3 months. But is this even in the map? We can't even get that in the map. But it's a big time skip. A lot of time here. But yeah. So Daenerys 3. Yeah. Now, I can kind of see that there's just been a lot of edits and re-edits of this chapter, a lot of mulling around. Which makes sense. As I say, this year was 1994 was was a slow year for George's writing on this, and so. But yeah, that's Daenerys 3. All right, we'll continue on next time with who's next? Who's next? It's Bran. Okay. All right. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.